Okay, today we are in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, we're at a church. It does happen to be a Sunday for me, but this is not just any church. Now, if you look, we are at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Now, when I read this plaque right here, it tells me that this church was organized first in 1886, and the first pastor was installed in 1894. Now, what's really important about this church, though, is in 1927, Martin Luther King Sr. became pastor of this church, and then in 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. became the associate pastor with his dad, Martin Luther King Sr., and served as associate pastor until 1968 when he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And we're going to go to Memphis. We'll be back and we'll go there. But this is where Dr. King's principles of nonviolent change were really formulated after he left his church in Montgomery, Alabama, where he led the boycott of the buses there with Rosa Parks. All right. Thanks for joining us, and stick around. We'll be right back. So, we're at Edmund Pettus Bridge. Edmund Pettus Bridge was named after the former U.S. Senator from Alabama and also the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. But this was also, and that was in 1940, by the way, when it was named after him. This was also in 1965, where in Selma, Alabama, Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and others led a march up and over this bridge that went all the way to Montgomery, Alabama, 50 miles that way, and we're going to take a look at that highway. But here's what you need to know. There were three marches, March 7th, March 9th, March 21st. March 7th was known as Bloody Sunday because what you can't see and what the marchers couldn't see is on the other side of this little hill here on the bridge were waiting police officers, and when the civil rights marchers got over that hill, they got to the top, they looked down and they saw the police officers, they went over and they were beaten by the police. 17 protesters or marchers were sent to the hospital that day. It became known as Bloody Sunday and inspired the future marches that would happen subsequently on the 9th and the 21st. And we're going to learn more about those. But let's go over and take a look at the other side of this bridge. So you can see that now we cross the crest of the bridge and the protesters look down here. And when they looked down, this is when they saw the police gathered. And they had two options. They could turn around and go back, or they could continue forward. Well, they knew if they continued forward, it might be deadly, but it was definitely going to be ugly. Martin Luther King was not on the Sunday Bloody Sunday march, but he was on the March 9th and the March 21st marches. And he came, once he heard about what happened here, he came and rallied with John Lewis and Hosea Williams to support them. Ultimately, as the marchers marched on March 21st, the governor of Alabama wouldn't support him, but the federal government did. And because of that, they had 25,000 people who marched from here, marched 50 miles that way to the Alabama state capitol. And when they arrived, they made a statement so loud it was heard around the world. And voting rights for African Americans was forever changed in the United States and in the South because of what happened right where you're standing, right near on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The bridge dedicated to the Ku Klux Klan and a racist and Confederate general now became the point that changed the world for African Americans in the United States. That's the significance of where we're standing today. I'm Steve Grubbs, your VictoryXR host. So we're on the highway that goes from Selma, Alabama, all the way to Montgomery. It's a little over a 50-mile walk this way. And it's a third march Governor Wallace of Alabama refused to protect the marchers, so the President of the United States, President Johnson, he protected the marchers with 1,900 members of the Alabama National Guard and then federal marshals and the FBI. The marchers left on March 21st and arrived at the Alabama State Capitol on March 25th. They made progress of a little more than 10 miles a day. It's a long walk. It's a dry, dusty highway back in 1965. So we made it to Montgomery, Alabama. And as we know, there were 3 marches that started in Selma. And the third one on March 21st finally made it to the state capital of Alabama. You can see here the state capital. And because of all that happened, the beatings on Bloody Sunday and then the murder of Mr. Reeb from the north and all of this that happened in the federal government sending in protection. By the time the third march occurred, people were so upset and so angry that 25,000 marchers joined the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King as they arrived here at the state capitol demanding voting rights and protections and civil rights. And so it ended here, but it started in Selma, 50 miles that way. So we're at the Lincoln Memorial here in Washington, D.C. And if you look out here, you see the Washington Memorial, and then beyond that, you may or may not be able to see the United States Capitol. But this is the exact location right up here where Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And it was in August of 1963. Now, that's 2 years before the marches in Selma and 5 years before he was assassinated in Memphis. But it was a culmination of an effort that Martin Luther King and other African American leaders in the United States had worked toward in the effort to bring civil rights. And in his prepared remarks, King starts by talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. That's why we're at the Lincoln Memorial, referencing Lincoln's speech about bringing freedom to slaves in the United States. But he said that black men and women in the United States were not yet free. And near the end of his speech, Mahalia Jackson, a famous African-American singer in the United States, yelled out, "Tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream." And so the Reverend Martin Luther King, Dr. King, departed from his prepared remarks, and he gave his very famous "I Have a Dream" line right there. And we're going to let you just take a minute and watch that right here.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
There you have it. You're standing in the location where Dr. Martin Luther King gave that speech, and just picture out there the 250,000 Americans who gathered here to bring civil rights to the United States in 1963. In April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to support the workers in a sanitation strike. There was one motel in town that during this period of segregation catered to African American travelers, and many famous black singers and entertainers stayed at this hotel right here, the Lorraine Motel. And it was owned by an African-American couple. It was close to Beale Street, so it was well situated. Because during this time period, in the South especially, motels and hotels would have white-only policies. And so there were special places that black Americans could stay. And this is what Dr. King was fighting for, was to end this type of segregation and racism. So he traveled to this hotel. And in particular, was staying in room 306, 307, he and Jesse Jackson and other members of his team. Unfortunately, James Earl Ray also came to this hotel. So behind me, this is the boarding house that James Earl Ray stayed at. And boarding house meaning a place that you stay, like an apartment or that type of thing. And he traveled here from Atlanta with a rifle and a scope. And on the other side of this building is the motel where Dr. King and his group were staying. And he came here to try to kill the idea of desegregation and civil rights. And what is true is that on that day in April of 1968, James Earl Ray killed Dr. Martin Luther King. But you know what he didn't kill? He didn't kill the idea. For 30 years, James Earl Ray sat in prison, and he watched day after day, month after month, as civil rights grew and as the legend and value of the work of Dr. King became more important. He lived to see the day when Martin Luther King, the man that he killed, gained his own national holiday. Even more, he saw civil rights become an everyday part of American life. Certainly something that the work has not done. But he saw that you can kill the man, but you can't kill the idea. When you stand for something, sometimes there's a price to pay. But if we don't stand for something like Dr. Martin Luther King did, then the greater price is what we all pay in society.